Howdy ho, friends and foes, and welcome to Dads on Life, your weekly episodic show about parenting from a male perspective. I'm your host, Jay Miles, and with me, as usual, sometimes, are my co-hosts Keith Bogan,
Hold that thought. Good morning.
Dave Dave Dusenberry,
Good morning, everybody.
and the finally returning wayward Douglas Hammerdike.
Present.
Doug,
been out on assignment for a while.
It took you almost 10 seconds to screw up a name. Nice job. Good job.
Doug, we miss you. I mean, we bust each other's chops a lot, but I mean, I messaged you Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday, and we this show really is the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. We we mess around a lot, argue, we get along usually, but it's never quite right when everybody's not here, and we're thrilled you're finally back. I like your shirt, by the way. So today we're going to be talking about something that I don't know, it just kind of crept in my head and realized we've never really gotten into it, and that is banning and burning of literature. Jesus, I cannot talk today.
Today.
Well, I mean, quite famously, we've all heard about it. It was originally a subplot, becomes part of the main plot in certain films. I know it was one in Footloose. There's a huge thing about books. Doug laughs because I mean it's the biggest pop culture reference to it, and then there's another reference to banning and burning of literature in Field of Dreams. There's a whole scene where she goes off on it.
Yeah, it's almost a trope at this point, you know.
Right. And I mean those scenes, and especially the scene where he sees them burning the books in Footloose, is some of John Lithgow's best work. Not ever. I mean, it was really well written, really well done on his part. But I went through some things, and one of the things I came across in 1969, the dictionary. Yes, the Webster's Dictionary was banned. So, let's get into it and let's talk about it. I mean, there's certain aspects like there's things I can understand being banned in certain areas, like 50 Shades of Grey. I can see that being banned in certain places. If you got a large religious population, yeah, I can see a book like that not making it, or being just thrown out completely.
Wait a No. 50 Shades of Grey is nowhere near the level of explicit that most of the smut books are out there. Smut books.
It is. It's one of the most banned.
Tens of thousands of different books, which I don't call books, but I don't care. I'm not going to ban anything. That's not even on the level of all that trash that's been made for years.
It's one of the most banned books out there.
Because it's popular, but not because of its content.
It's calmer than the story of O.
Yeah.
But that, something, it's interesting because banning books because of sexual content is almost not why that the topic of banning books is controversial nowadays. Because they're trying to ban books about lifestyle choices, about gender choices, and they're really banning. It's not about banning books. It's about banning the discussion of the topics that anger the left and right wing, the extreme left and right wings.
Yeah,
Well,
and
the Satanic Verses. I mean,
yeah.
Salman Rushdie there was an attempt on Salman Rushdie's life last year. So
book banning comes from everything that I've seen, right? So I have some pretty strong feelings when it comes to censorship. I'm sure this is something that Doug and I have in common. Everything that I've seen when it comes to these groups like the Moms for Liberty and stuff like that are pushing a lot of these bans and things like that now, it stems from they find a particular subject matter, quote unquote, icky or something that they personally don't relate to, empathize with, or understand. So instead of taking the time to understand it and ask questions and be curious, they decide, well, I don't like it, so I don't think anybody else should read this either. This is a common topic. It comes up all the time in music. I know we've talked about music censorship on this podcast before. Books are really no different. Books are, in my humble opinion, books are there to challenge ideas, challenge preconceived notions, give perspective from people, places, and things that you may not normally see in your everyday life. Are there audiences where said material is not appropriate? Sure. I tend to be much more in the personal choice category when it comes to that stuff. My 12 and a half cents.
Yeah, I see where Dave's coming from, and he hit on one of the topics. Well, things is age appropriateness. We have age appropriateness standards for a lot of things in the United States.
absolutely.
So I think that would go a long way when we're talking about what is allowed in a public library or a school. You see, looking at this, we've had book bannings and burnings for over thousands of years. So it's kind of hard. We have to be very clear on what we're discussing here, because as to like, what is the government banning? Does the government ban books? Technically not. They have ways that you could read stuff in a personal matter. The government themselves, they do have a list of books that are deemed not appropriate for like normal consumption. But I know that me as a kid, like, anarchist cookbook, is that appropriate for kids? No. Did I get ideas and do things from the anarchist cookbook? Yes. Did we get the anarchist cookbook stolen from a library? Yes. So,
I'm not familiar with this particular
I am.
Sorry.
I am.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, that's something that I would, turn to not be appropriate for kids. Although, I still have all my digits and stuff like that, but
Yeah. And it's like,
Yeah.
Appropriate. The challenge becomes the word appropriate, right? So appropriate, unfortunately, appropriate is subjective. And being that it's subjective, it means different things to different people. It's not objective. It's not a standard that can be applied to a wider array of folks, right? Subjective is weird. So subjective, I mean, you can kind of come down to, whether it's a piece of literature, whether it's deemed acceptable or not. I can't personally stand other people deciding for me what should be acceptable for me or for my kids. That's for me to decide and for me to teach them. That's just a personal thing with me. What level does it go to? Is it federal? Is it state? Is it local? Is it township? I tend to all this stuff. My personal thing, I feel it should come down to individuality. I think having like categorization or rankings, things like the movie ratings and stuff like that, if you want to categorize certain things for certain audiences, like I'm okay with that. But outright banning, I'm not a fan.
But nowhere is things really outright banned. And they're like, go through one of the things like Keith said, with different, that the right is really attacking like certain types of materials which are of the sexual nature and transgenderism and stuff. And I told Jason already, my son started the homeschool thing from the state, and they sent home, well, they sent in a box, like a dozen books that were on the reading level for him, as well as deemed appropriate, and the ones that he should read throughout the year. A lot of the books came from, from my point of view, a very leftist authors, and a lot of them were LGBT exclusive. And it was what it was. Was I 100% like, hey, yeah, go run out and read those? Well, but I guess that's what they deemed appropriate, and what I found myself. I mean, my kids get a lot of opinions and a lot of things from church and the way we run our own household and ideas. So, am I afraid that my son is gonna run out and do something, based on what he's learned? Maybe. Will he have ideas different than ours? Possibly. You know, but I just don't think that forced opinion either is the way to go. Where Dave is saying, "Oh, well, I should, choose, and I could have chose," But I think that at sometimes, too, the content that is chosen isn't necessarily the way that I'd go about things, because we did have one where a friend of ours is going to college, and the studies that she was doing, the class did have like a thing that writing about women, and there was it was a book reading thing, and she chose a person that was a Catholic saint, and the teacher denied it and she said, but it meets all the information that you provided. And she's like, well, we gave you a list. And she's like, but to my Catholic, like, faith doesn't apply to the ones that you've provided. So I'm asking for me to be able to do this alternate. And this teacher said no. And she did get a failing mark on writing the review of the book. So, I mean, sometimes it also is forced upon us, because, schools are indoctrinating. That's why we send our kids there, to learn that 2 and 2 is 4 and not 5, you know. So it can be interesting from that point of view as well. And, well, the other thing I was going to say is another way that also the book banning goes into like other forms of taking away freedom of speech could also be being deplatformed or being removed from Amazon, because I think they're like the biggest seller of books. So if your book is removed from there, then that's a way to silence you, and that is happening. So and with us talking about this, just to put a little bit of a fact also on it, was looking up was that like who does the most book bannings? Asian countries.
Yep.
They do about, like a good like 50 something percent of it. Then the European nations. America only comes in at 7%.
Right.
So if we were like have the problem that some of these other countries do, and we'd see a lot more people out there like with their arms folded and angry faces, I'm sure.
Not to cross over into other genres if we can keep this to books. When you hear about movies being banned, it's not here. It's not in Europe. It's usually China, Asia. That's the Asian countries. So that makes a lot of sense. Well, Barbie. Well, the Marvel movies have gone through it. Okay. Yep. Anyway, I have a little bit of the list of the most banned books in the world. In America. The list was produced. Articles from November 10th of 2022. There's a bunch of them that and Tango makes 3. There's one that the picture is Ted Cruz holding it, stamped racism, anti-racism in you by Ibram Kendi. Ibram Kendi appears on this list multiple times, which isn't much of a surprise. Another one example of Ibram Kendi being on this list of how to be an anti-racist. Ibram Kendi's, one of the more interesting figures out there right now. But I mean, through time, To Kill a Mockingbird, Slaughterhouse-Five, things like that have faced bans. One of them, you're talking about being age appropriate. They banned in the 1960s. They banned in certain areas. They banned Where the Wild Things Are for below certain ages. I understand that. 3-4-year-olds reading or being read Where the Wild Things Are, that'll scare the crap out of you. That'll scare the crap out of some adults that I would say, I wouldn't read that to certain people. One of the more interesting things that I've come across that's been highly banned is a book called The Bluest Eye. It's a book about it's kind of about here's another one that's come up multiple times. Tricks. It's a movie about a book about teenagers who take the path down to through drug use and into underage prostitution, things like that. So there's some tough subjects in this time with books. But The Bluest Eye, I'm trying to find again. But like I said, it's come up a couple of times I've seen. That book is on, a lot of lists for it was one of the most banned books last year. It's only banned like 52 times in schools, but when you think about all the school districts in this country, that's really not a lot, but it definitely brings it tackles sensitivity issues of racism, incest, sexual abuse, things like that. It's pretty wild what some of the books that are out there now,
Yeah. I mean, I had a thought and it just totally left my head. What do you think, Keith? I see you sitting there, and I see you making some notes.
Several thoughts. I have several thoughts, but I've been patiently waiting. One of the things that struck me, what you were talking about, I can't even remember what it was, but when I was a sophomore in college, I had an English class, and at the beginning of the course, the professor said, I use the term professor loosely, the instructor said, the entire grade of the course is going to be a paper you write at the end of the course. No tests, no quizzes, no attendance, just the paper. That's it. And I'm like, that's cool. I'm a good writer. And you can write about anything you want to, as long as you follow the precepts of what you learn about the English language in this course. So I continued to write about a topic that I'm very familiar with, the subject of baseball. And at the time, this was the early 80s, where I'm writing about the financial impacts of free agency and things like that. It was a freaking brilliant paper. I mean, I look back on it now, and it was probably the best paper I ever wrote, not just from a content standpoint, but from a technical standpoint. I got a B on the paper. When I went to the professor afterwards and said, I don't understand, why didn't I get an A+? This is really outstanding work. She simply said, yeah, it was absolutely perfect. It followed every precept I wanted you to follow. You absolutely learned the content. I don't like baseball. Now, the reason I bring that up is that a form of censorship? We're on a very slippery slope here. And one person's view of content is obviously different than others. And I was thinking also, there's a, if you go to a library, there's a fiction section, and there's a do-it-yourself section, and there's a new publication section. There's always a children's section. Is that a form of censorship? By telling the kids they can only select from this certain group over here, and I think all of us agree. You know, Jason just mentioned a couple of books. I think David did as well. Dave did. I don't understand. You know, we're not going to point a 4-year-old at 50 Shades of Grey, and
right.
But are we actually censoring their world by saying you stay over here and look and take this? I have no problem with doing it, and I think that's all society wants. But it is actually a form of censorship.
So I would say I don't necessarily equate censorship with categorization.
Right.
I think that's the first thing I'm thinking of. I think to be able to categorize items into whether it's by genre or things, books are clearly written for a given demographic, right? A lot of books are written for a clear demographic. So to be able to organize said books by said demographic to better reach a given target audience, I don't have a problem with that. I don't. My view, censorship would be not categorizing books, but taking them out of the library and not making them available. I guess that's what I would. That's where I would draw that line on that particular topic.
But most of the stuff that come into the news is stuff that's in school libraries, is, you know, where the gist of all the arguments come from. So, you know, that's why I was saying we have to be careful about what we're talking about here, because if, you know, if that's what we're talking about, school libraries, then, you know, it kind of frames the argument, you know, brings context. Yeah. So
yeah, and you know, even school libraries, like it really comes down to, you know, and yeah, and I guess this is a good point, right? So is there a difference between Moms for Liberty saying that you can't carry this in your school and a school administrator saying we can't carry this in our school? Is there a difference? I don't know. I mean, I've never considered the approach of a school administrator saying.
I would have to say that absolutely there's a huge difference, because one is an opinion, which is what the First Amendment is based on, and one is a policy.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, they're not even the same topic. They're vastly different, and I actually have no problem with people voicing their opinion and saying I don't think that book should be there. What I have a problem with is them forcing the issue, and not to, as Jason said, not to mix genres. But in my case, I'm going to say mix political issues. And I don't know if this is going to upset anybody on this call, on this cast, but is the attempt to ban books any different than the attempt to control a woman's choice? To me, the attempt to ban books isn't about banning books. It's about exerting control.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I am one of the many people who believes that an attempt to ban abortion is an attempt. Nobody cares about that. They care about control. So again, I could very easily equate these topics.
Right, but the purpose are extremely different, and the people coming at them would be totally different. I mean, I understand that you're saying that, you know, that you're trying to stop someone from doing something by using your power of authority. But I think that banning books, like we said, is, well, like we said, it's really what we are talking about is age appropriateness, and should they be in public school, public school libraries. I mean, you know, I don't see how you could cross that to, you know, So,
Well, I just spoke on behalf of my son.
Yeah.
I can tell you right now, the two of them, and we are here for, dads on life stuff.
no, I mean,
Two of them would have absolutely jumped up and screamed in this podcast that it has nothing to do with the content of the books. It has to do with control. And
it does
you
have to
can
do
take
with the
that to
content
all the
of the
different
book.
issues. You can take it to all the different issues in society and everything that politicians are trying to do. It's not about the issue. It's
But they're
about
not trying to ban
controlling other
all
people.
books. They're only trying to ban specific books.
Right, but they're controlling people's what they're learning, what they're viewing, their opinions by banning those specific books because they're
But
trying
we're
to
not
guide
really
them into
banning
their
them.
own set of beliefs.
We're just saying that they're not appropriate for the school, just as well as we've already deemed so many other things like rated R movies, drinking, smoking.
Yeah.
There,
Okay,
there's so many.
you want to get me started on that? A society that believes that it's okay to put a gun and tell someone who's 18 years old to kill someone else in a war, but they
Sure.
can't drink
Oh,
alcohol.
geez.
But they
But like
can't drink alcohol, but they can kill somebody. Okay,
yeah,
already lost me on that.
So let's
get back to our topic.
Yeah, exactly. Watching the smoke get the nice coating of Crisco.
Yes, exactly.
I understand. I certainly understand that I think, Keith, what you say certainly about the control aspect weighs heavily, right? Controlling the narrative or controlling the information that people have available to be able to base opinion and stances on is part of what we're talking about here. Things that people find icky that they don't understand, and rather than take the time to engage in some empathy and outside perspective and learn to gain perspective and to, hey, if say you learn on a given topic and you still don't agree with it, then that's fine. At least you're on an educated stance about it. But just because it's something that you don't agree with doesn't mean that you have to make everybody not agree with it. The one thing I've seen when it comes to book bannings, schools and things like that, right? And I don't know if it's public or private, primarily institutions that are doing a lot of these things. I would imagine some of the more religious-based schools are certainly more apt to do some of these book bannings because they want to stay within the given religious boundaries that they have for their given school. Religious texts, as we've all seen, can be pretty violent. It can be pretty sexually explicit. Can be there's some passages in there that are pretty damn tough. I haven't seen a religious school certainly not ban a religious book that falls within their given religious sect, right? Very accepting of their chosen tome. Obviously, they may choose to ban things that don't believe the same God that they do. But that to me says, again, it's not necessarily about the content, but it's more about control, because you can have equal parts of violence and sexually explicit passages in a given tome that's accepted and one that's rejected. So what's the difference? Why is one banned and the other one not?
Well, knowing that going to private schools, you signed up for what you get.
Right.
So, you're already going into it. But they do allow you to opt out. All the schools, all the Catholic schools in this area at least, have it that you can opt out of any kind of religious, and there are a lot of kids that go there that are not of the Catholic faith. A good portion of the school that Brendan goes to are not of the Catholic faith. So there is the option, as to, are they like with the library and stuff, what they don't allow in there, I don't know. I don't think that they've really banned anything, but schools are very finite, and I'm sure that some of the books that more recently that have come up, that have sexually explicit comics are more likely not allowed. I would assume. I mean, I did look at and read some of the stuff, other ones that were being banned, and I was like, well, highly not appropriate, you know. So, but like I said, you have the choice to opt out of stuff like that, you know, when it comes to private schools. And like I said, when you go to a private school, obviously you sign on to that. So, but I guess you guys saw that in Utah, they did ban the Bible from public libraries.
I did not see that.
Yeah. So it looks like they did it, and then they're fighting against having it overturned, and also, and it was all for the reasons that Dave just mentioned: the violence and the sexual content within the Bible.
Yep.
So
in Utah,
yes,
that's
Utah.
an interesting one.
And like
I mean,
we keep coming around to this. The whole difference between, you know, things that Dave was big into this, like when we talked like a while ago. It also depends on demographics of where you live. So
right.
a lot of this is definitely, you know, to specific to where you live. And when you look up like where the most book bans come from and stuff, you could definitely see what's being banned in what area of the country, which is
Right.
widely different in other areas than some. So I mean, you know, like we're back to this point of people and their preferences and where they're from and stuff. So, you know.
And you have a natural clash there between society and autonomy, right? So society says, well, I'm not so sure about this. Autonomy may say, I can't stand this, this needs to go. Or autonomy may say, I want to have the choice to be able to do this if I choose, you know? So, I mean, that's just an inherent part. That's an inherent clash that we have anywhere. We see it getting bigger ramifications when um, governmental institutions or other places, like Keith said, that make the policy chime in on this, and they take one side over the other. You know, it's
But I mean,
yeah,
also,
that's that. I agree, Doug. Like that's one of the big parts. It depends on, you know, some of it. You know, you could have 100 people in town, and 98 are like, nope, this needs to go. You know, but you have two families that are like, well, I want to have the freedom to do that. So which do you choose? Which way do you go? You know, do you do you take the overwhelming majority and allow and have our elected officials follow make our elected officials act on that because you're the ones who voted them in, and they should be speaking for you, and this is what you're saying? Or do you honor the two people that are like, well, it's not hurting anybody that I can see, and we need to preserve individual freedom? That's a powerful thing with a lot of this stuff.
yeah, I just think that it's a very limited resource, let's say public school libraries. Uh, so the amount of books that they can allow or whatever is very limited. Uh, and is there certain things that, you know, would I want my kid to come across? You know, they're still available. I mean, I can get it from Amazon or anywhere else. I can find things on the internet and all. You know, doesn't need to be in the school library. You know, and I've come across a couple other books that that I would say, yeah, definitely not. You know, people so that are definitely not appropriate for schools, although they're written in a forum way for youth, maybe older youth or whatever. But you know, I don't see why they would be carried in a school. Like I said, once again, it's, you know, we send our kids to school to learn, and what are they learning, and what's the purpose of some of the content that we carry in there. You know, that's what I would definitely lead my, if it came up to a vote to, but it generally doesn't in this area, let's say, you know. So yeah, I mean, does everything need to be carried? I don't know. And the purpose of having it, if we're sticking to like school libraries, is puts a more finite reason on the discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where I think erring towards categorization is something I'm fine with. And when you err towards categorization, the way categorization works is if you have something that falls outside of that category, it's not going to get included within that category. Obviously, that's the whole point. So your result of that is you're going to have material that's not going to be available where a given set of books that fall under a category are going to be. And so, when it comes, and I guess that's where I delineate with some school libraries, and I guess the thing with that is, well, who decides what falls in that category? Is that the administration? Is that the parents? Is that and how much say does the school body or the parenting body at large have, and when those decisions are being made as to what falls within that category and is deemed acceptable to carry in that given place?
Well, I mean, one of the books that coming up on the list that I saw, and I can understand it to a point, especially with what part of what it was banned for was, is The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. That's something that comes up, it's come up on multiple lists for various reasons. One of them being parts of it being sexually explicit, where it was actually edited down and edited out in some cases. But then you have a case where in 1983, surprise, surprise, the state of Alabama textbook committee called for rejecting the book because it was a real downer. That's when you kind of go, really? You're going to give us that as a reasoning? Another one is the Lorax. The Lorax was in 1989. The Lorax, the Dr. Seuss book, they called for the banning of that because of the word stupid. Okay, I mean, I have some vague. I mean, considering who you're teaching it to, but it's not a word most of them are unfamiliar with, and they know what it is, and a lot of them use it more often than they should. But I mean, like I said, there's a lot of them come down to sexually explicit natures at times. Some of the things that they're talking about. I mean, Little Red Riding Hood was another one. But and the argument there was actually from Culver, California, who called for the banning of it, saying the version of the tale by Trinus Scarrett Hyman, they saw a different message. Alcohol is yummy. They were outraged that young Miss Riding Hood is pictured with a bottle of wine in her basket, which Granny drinks half a bottle of wine with a red nose. It's a lesson we don't want our kids learning. What's that?
No, I was gonna say some of the books go well beyond what some of the stuff that are put in newspapers and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's the subjective versus objective fact. Like these things are, somebody's taking a subjective opinion and saying, well, we need to base this because I find it icky, or I don't agree with this, or this makes me uncomfortable. I tend to be of the camp that if literature is making you uncomfortable, that says more about you than it does about the book. But that's me.
Oral sex with an adult, I find not appropriate for schools, which it is carried in some schools. I mean, that with pictures. I mean, that I don't think falls into the realm of what should be in school. But what Jason was also saying was pretty interesting, that a lot of well, not a lot, but in the past like couple 2-3 years, we've also seen a lot of books that aren't so like PC. Also, they just decided, well, for some minor things like going ahead and just changing the text, so now that to bring them more in line with today's culture, stuff where somebody might have been called fat or whatever, not saying that, and just rewriting
that's like
books.
That's like taking out the audio of the fart scene in Blazing Saddles. I mean, seriously, what?
So that was another thing that I was like looking into is the amount of books that have been just rewritten, you know, from how they originally were intended, you know, to fit today's society and make them more, you know, okay for that nobody is offended, let's say, type stuff, which is another
Hit a
form
very
of.
interesting. You guys have hit on a very interesting viewpoint that I hadn't thought of before. The focus on categorization. Why hasn't anybody thought about the idea of school libraries having only certain categories, but letting public libraries or private libraries have anything they want? And that's where I get to the control part, by the way, because the argument against many of these books is they're inappropriate for children. But in fact, they're trying to ban them in society.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, okay, we'll take them out of the schools, we'll take the category of sexualization or sexuality or violence or something like that out of schools. They're trying to literally erase them from the face of the planet.
Agreed. Yeah, that's what I have a problem.
On certain places, they're still banning the Diary of Anne Frank. Let's put it that way. In Texas, I believe, within the last couple of weeks, the teacher was fired for using it.
Oh
So,
yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
And it's Texas. You know your audience.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say that, yeah. But yeah, there was a teacher removed from their position for using the Diary of Anne Frank. Not real surprising in Texas.
Well, yeah, and that's the whole, you know, that's where the given society of given area is making that choice and trying to force that onto whoever is there. That's the whole point that I was bringing up earlier. You know, if you have 98% society says get rid of it, but 2% is like, no, we should keep it available. You know, you get to your public versus private bounds there and things like that. And I think that's where we go back to what Keith was talking about, which is if you have certain books that are categorized that are appropriate for this given scenario, then you keep them there. But a public library can have sections for all of these books, but still keep the books. Like, right. You can have a section for it, but don't put the book in a section, but don't take the book out.
Right.
Right. Which, yeah.
What do you think, Doug? Looked like you had something on your mind there.
No, yeah. I mean, I think there's always been like an area of, well, I know the Oak Ridge Public Library did have books that were determined that they were of adult nature, and they did have specific areas for them and stuff. And I think that schools, yeah, that it's a very different thing that we're talking about. I don't think that anything is being erased from society altogether. Which I did mention like earlier was like being removed from Amazon as a book purchase. That is more of a way to being removed from everywhere.
Right.
You know, right. That there are books that were, and the argument came back, well, why is it okay to keep Mein Kampf, you know, as a purchasable book on Amazon, but when Harry met Harry is not allowed on Amazon, you know, like, and once you're removed from Amazon, then that's it. That's your entire, like, you're silenced, you know?
And so now that brings into, okay, so we have a difference between public libraries where people borrow books, take them out, read them, and blah, the books are provided by the libraries for anybody to access, and a more capitalistic approach when it comes to a storefront like Amazon selling these books. So is there an inherent right that Amazon needs to abide by as I mean, they're a publicly traded company. That's true, but they still sell products. That's what they do, and they work with vendors. They're a third party intermediary to sell products. Do they have an inherent thing about them that they have to sell whatever people put up to market to sell through that site, or do they have right of refusal to allow people to sell things on their platform that they don't agree with?
Well, they don't apply the idea of things that they don't agree with evenly. They just pick and choose what they, I'd have to think. But
just again, something to consider, something to think about, because we see this a lot in other aspects, right? A CEO of a company does something jackassery, so now all of his product is like everybody takes down. Yes, Mike Lindell, I'm talking about you. But he's trying to sell product, and he acted like a jackass, and now nobody wants to carry his product. And now he's bitching that everybody's censoring him. But again, I'm really trying not to hop on that Crisco slide. Trying to stay on topic here. Amazon, the thing with Amazon is that, I mean, I see at some point Amazon's going to get hit with a monopolistic approach lawsuit if they haven't already, right? It makes sense. They shut down a lot of other companies because, well, they do the job better than anybody else, but when it comes to the specific products that they offer, especially when it comes to books, I spent several years as a manager, lead guy in the booksellers world. I worked for a company called Encore way back in a former life, and we had book buyers that bought the books that we chose to sell in our stores. And I'm sure there are plenty of books that were not allowed to be sold in our stores based on what the gods of book buying decided we were going to carry. Is that censorship against the authors? I don't know. Does a given author have an outlet to be able to get their material out that may not involve a mid-level market book chain like I worked at? I don't know. So I don't know. Like, I think when you get into the capitalist side of it, I mean, if you're going to make the monopolistic approach that Amazon has, if they're literally the only place that a person can sell their book at, and there's no other outlets, I would agree with you. I don't know if that's necessarily the case.
Yeah.
God, I haven't thought about that job in forever.
Is Keith even still with us?
I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm listening, and as you went into an author who you asked the question, is that censoring an author for one book that they have, even if they have other books that aren't being censored or anybody's trying to block? Again, I would go down the path of, is that any different than a politician who has one unpopular viewpoint, or a person who has one unpopular viewpoint, but the rest of their package of views is agreeable, if you will, and yet you pick the one viewpoint that is somebody gets very angry about, and suddenly that person's a pariah.
Well, I mean, we all know one of the most famous cases ever out right now. Well, especially with what had happened to a couple of years ago, and that's Solomon Rushdie.
Yep.
We all know, I don't know if we've read it, but we all know the Satanic Verses. I mean, he's done more than just that particular book, but he's been very critical of a lot of things in the world. To where there was a fatwa declared against him. And there's people who clearly wanted this man dead and still want this man dead.
Yep.
For what he wrote. He was attacked forgot when it was. I don't think it was last year. I think it might have been the year before, 2022. But the man survived it, and he's made some significant recoveries and doing okay. Okay, as okay can be for a man who was attacked by a terrorist, and is 76 years old. Amazingly, he actually did keep the sight in the eye that he was stabbed near.
That's rather shocking.
It's very shocking that the attack that happened, but I would say not exactly surprising considering what we know has been said by certain people about him. They're not hiding that there's been death threats on his life. So, I mean, that's that goes beyond banning and burning. That's quite literally, yeah, threatening the man's life.
Yep.
And almost conceivably almost killing him. One good shot with the guy who attacked him. Salman Rushdie's no longer with us.
You can still buy the Satanic Verses and read it in any college just about anywhere in the U.S.
You buy it at most bookstores, I'm sure.
Yeah, you can buy it at most bookstores. Because the religion that doesn't like him is not the one that's native to our country.
Right. And I can only imagine what a book like that, if somebody wrote a book like that now, what the kind of issues they'd be facing. It's pretty unbelievable to think that of somebody doing that now. I mean, there's plenty of people who have written books, and you kind of look at them and go, "What the hell are you writing?" What are you writing? There's some people who know how, have made a living of pushing buttons, so to speak, when it comes to what they write and say. Obviously,
well, that's how you sell books.
Mm-hmm.
Outrage sells. It always has.
Controversy controversy creates cash.
Yep.
I will say, as we begin to approach the hour mark, I feel like we're sort of there at this point. Everything we've talked about seems to get back to control. But that's my own viewpoint. I'm trying to keep the viewpoint of our kids.
Yeah.
And how they view it. And I will say, again, my viewpoint, that as every generation gets more progressive, we tussle back and forth in each generation about allowing books and allowing things in houses of worship and allowing dress codes and whether or not you can drink and things like that. But if you look at overall generations and periods of time in history, we always go to what is more progressive. We progress happens. And so in my mind, there's no question that at some point society will stop worrying about things like individual books and whether or not they should be available. It's probably the responsibility of the current generation to make sure that the path to that isn't so badly sent back to the 16th century. And that's why we tussle now. But the reality is by the time our children are grandparents, this won't even be a topic. We'll have progressed beyond this. Those that are afraid of change, and there is a certain group of people in every generation that is, will be long buried. Will be long gone. So, like many other topics, I think we could say it's good to have a conversation like this because it's harder to make progress when you throw yourself back to the 16th century. But as long as you can sort of maintain footing and have conversations, and even if you have pretty intense arguments, and sometimes they result in violence, but eventually progress always wins. I will say that. I will also say that I just want to extend my appreciation to you guys for putting my brain on this particular topic, because without a doubt, my brain, I think everybody else's brain, has been somewhere else this week.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Totally understand, especially you, Keith, especially.
Well, I
Yes.
appreciate that, but it's, one of my neighbors came up to me a couple of days ago and actually apologized to me. She's like, "I'm so sorry for what's happening in Israel." And I sort of scratched my head about that because, I'm the guy in this group who happens to be of the Jewish faith, but what has happened is an offense to the entire world, and I didn't understand why she would single me out for that apology, especially since she had nothing to do with it. But I get it. I sort of understand on some sort of theoretical level why people would look at it that way. But I think that what is going on is, a horrific offense to all of us. But talking about a slippery slope. We could literally equate the conversation we're having here to that conversation, because you have a lot of people, you have a comparatively small group of people who believe that a certain background should be eliminated from the face of the planet. Just like we have a relatively small group of people in the United States who believe we should eliminate from the face of the planet certain books.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, the Crisco just went flying across the room. Sorry about that, Dave.
Oh my God, it's like a Jackson Pollock painting in here now.
Absolutely, it is. But I just want to extend appreciation to you guys for giving me an hour to focus on something somewhat different. And you remembering that my brain can function in a different area where it has not for at least a week. So I appreciate that, guys.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty good place to leave this for the time being. So from all of us here at Dad's on Life, take care, everybody. And of course, Keith, eat my shorts.
Ever.
Take care, guys.